Let me begin with a question. Not a comfortable one, not a polite one, but an essential one. Is the relationship you're holding on to right now making you grow? Or is it slowly making you disappear? This is not a question about emotions alone. It is a question about identity, about consciousness, about whether you are still you. In many spiritual traditions, especially in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, there is a moment described as a threshold, a space between worlds, a state where the soul is asked a single, uncompromising question. Does this path awaken you or diminish you? That is where you are now. And let me be clear about something. This is not a video about fixing your partner. It is not about saving a marriage. It is not about becoming more patient, more understanding, or more mature in the way society often demands. This is about one thing only: how not to lose yourself. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. Many people already know they are suffering. They already know something is wrong. And yet they say, I can't leave. Not right now. There are children. There are financial realities. I'm not strong enough yet. These are not excuses. They are constraints. They are real. And any philosophy that ignores reality is not wisdom, it's denial. Even the ancient teachings of the Bardo Thadal do not demand awakening at the cost of reality. They do not ask you to become a hero overnight. So today we are not talking about leaving. We are talking about something far more urgent. How to survive without collapsing. Because the greatest danger in a psychologically controlling relationship is not the shouting, not the accusations, not even the surveillance. The most dangerous moment is this: the moment you begin to doubt yourself. At first, the question is simple. Why are they acting like this? But over time, it changes. Am I too sensitive? Did I misunderstand? Maybe this is my fault. Maybe I should be more careful. And right there, in that subtle shift, the structure of control is completed. Because their suspicion has now become your conscience. This is what the Bardo Thadal describes in philosophical terms as mistaking another's karma for your own. In modern psychological language, we might call this internalized distortion, or emotional conditioning, or trauma bonding. But the mechanism is the same. You begin carrying what was never yours. And here lies the deeper problem. We have been taught over and over again that endurance is virtue. That understanding is love. That sacrifice is responsibility. So what if that teaching is incomplete? What if, at a certain point, endurance becomes self-erasure? The ancient text is surprisingly direct about this. To carry another's burden of karma is not compassion. It is ignorance. So if you cannot leave yet, then you must draw a line somewhere. Not a dramatic line, not a visible one, but a psychological boundary that keeps you intact. Think of it as a minimum survival protocol. Not to win, not to fix, but to remain whole enough to eventually choose. There are 4 elements to this. First, the emotional distance. Not indifference, but separation. You must learn to observe without absorbing. Second, at least one external anchor. One person outside the relationship who knows the truth. Isolation is not just a condition. It is a strategy of control. Third, documentation. Because memory bends under pressure. But written truth resists distortion. And fourth, professional support. Not as a luxury, but as structure. Because clarity is difficult to maintain alone inside confusion. This is not compromise. This is not surrender. This is preparation. A delayed exit is still an exit if you are moving consciously. So let me say this as clearly as possible. This video is not telling you to endure more. It is telling you this. Even if you cannot leave the relationship yet, do not let your mind become its hostage. Return for a moment to that original question, the one asked in the threshold between worlds. Is this path awakening you or shrinking you? Because if a relationship is slowly making you smaller, less certain, less alive, less yourself, then it is no longer a relationship. It is a psychological limbo, a space where you exist, but do not fully live. And what follows in this series will not be comfortable. It will not be filled with soft encouragement or easy hope. Instead, it will offer something far more necessary: clarity. Because for someone, somewhere, even right now, this may not be just content. It may be a tool for survival. If this message reached you, not just intellectually, but personally, then consider sharing it. Because there are others standing in that same invisible threshold, asking themselves the same question, and not yet knowing the answer. Next, we move into something practical. What does survival actually look like when you cannot leave yet? Let's begin. So we begin with survival, with the quiet discipline of not collapsing even when you cannot yet leave. But what happens after you finally step out? What happens when the door closes, and yet something inside you still feels unfinished? Because here is the paradox no one prepares you for. Leaving the relationship does not mean the relationship has left you. There comes a moment, often unexpectedly, when you feel the urge to reach out again. Not because you want to go back, not because you've forgotten the pain, but because something pulls at you. You tell yourself, maybe I should apologize. Maybe they're struggling without me. Maybe I should explain everything one last time. But this impulse, this sudden gravity toward the past, is not love. It is not closure. It is addiction to the role you once played. In the language of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, this is what might be described as the final hand of karma pulling you back. And in that moment, you must remember one sentence, not emotionally, but with precision. The urge to explain is the signal that you are about to be bound again, because explanation in that relationship was never about understanding. It was about submission, rebuilding the self after collapse. True recovery does not begin with relief. It begins with reconstruction. After leaving, there is a stage many people overlook, and yet it is absolutely essential. You must build a new narrative of who you are, because in that relationship, your identity was reduced to a single role, the one who is suspected. And recovery means ending that story. It means slowly, deliberately, reclaiming versions of yourself that were buried. The version of you who works not to prove worth, but to express it. The version of you who laughs without scanning the room for consequences. The version of you who chooses without fear of punishment. The ancient text warns us clearly. A soul that does not claim a new name returns to its previous state. If you do not redefine yourself, you will unconsciously return to what once defined you. The hidden traps of healing. But even here, especially here, there are dangers. 3 in particular that quietly sabotage recovery. First, I should still try to understand them. This sounds compassionate, but often it is simply the old pattern wearing a moral disguise. Second, false neutrality. When others say, maybe both sides were at fault, they may unintentionally repeat the very distortion you escaped. Third, premature closure. It's all in the past now. No need to dwell on it. But healing does not obey moral timelines. It requires distance. It requires time. And most importantly, it requires truth. What does recovery actually mean? People often ask, when will I feel okay again? But that question assumes that recovery equals happiness. It doesn't. The Tibetan Book of the Dead offers a far more precise criterion. Recovery begins the moment you no longer wish to return. Not when you feel joy, not when you feel peace, but when the illusion has fully lost its power. a structural understanding of the relationship. To move forward, you must understand what you were inside, because that relationship was not random. It followed a structure. Anxiety control, suspicion, punishment, compliance, and then again, and again, a closed loop, a self-reinforcing system. The text would call this a self-sustaining cycle of karma. And within that system, there is one thought, more dangerous than all others. If I just endure a little more. But let's be exact. Endurance beyond a certain threshold is not strength. It is participation in your own erasure. As the teaching states, to live someone else's hell in their place is not compassion. It is ignorance. Freedom redefined. Many people misunderstand freedom. They think freedom means no longer being doubted. But that is not freedom. True freedom is this. Even if doubt exists, you are no longer controlled by it. It is the state where their suspicion may remain, but your identity does not collapse. That is freedom. The final discipline. Do not be pulled back. Even after leaving, the system tries to reassemble itself inside you. Through guilt, through memory, through longing disguised as responsibility. So you must practice something deceptively simple. Return what is not yours. Their anxiety theirs. Their anger theirs. Their loneliness theirs. Because as long as you carry it, you are still inside the relationship, even if physically gone. One sentence for survival. If you remember nothing else, remember this. This is not my responsibility. This is not avoidance. This is psychological boundary. This is how you remain intact. The final illusion. There is one last belief that keeps people trapped until the very end. Someday, they will understand. Someday, they will trust me. But this expectation is not hope. It is illusion. Because in that system, trust is not a foundation. It is a reward for obedience. And rewards can always be withdrawn. Why it was so hard to leave. Let's clarify one final misconception. You did not stay because of love. You stayed because of three forces. First, role addiction. You became the one who explains, soothes, and endures. Second, false responsibility. You believed their collapse would be your fault. Third, loss of self outside the relationship. Without the role, you no longer recognized who you were. The text describes this state as attachment replacing identity. The core insight. So here is the conclusion. Stripped of all illusion. This was never about love. It was never about personality. It was about structure, a system of perception that reproduces doubt, regardless of reality, which is why no matter how much you changed, nothing fundamentally changed. And so, the only question that matters, not will they change, but will I stop being pulled into it? Because the awakened mind does not deny illusion. It simply refuses to enter it. As the Tibetan Book of the Dead teaches, the awakened one sees the illusion, but does not step inside it. If this gave you clarity, not comfort, but clarity, then share it. Because someone else is still standing at that invisible threshold, not yet knowing that the exit already exists. In the next talk, we turn to a different structure, not suspicion of the present, but fear of the future, a different kind of relationship, a different kind of illusion, and a different kind of trap. I'll see you there.